And with that, I will close this session and do stay on. We have the panel about to start. So this is the first of two panels that we are hosting, and we're very happy to have to present four people. And there will be a multi-log discussion around the topic, a two-word topic on exploring designs. I will make it a little bit more precise in a moment, but before that, I will take the opportunity to introduce very briefly the four people in the panel. Please switch on your cameras. You know who you are. So, firstly, it's Reni Hofmu, who is a artist based in Graz, Austria. And she's also a curator and a radio producer with working with this very interestingly named radio station in Graz, which is called Helsinki. So I'm curious about that. I looked a little bit at the programming and is this any Finnish connection? I don't know. Maybe we will hear about it. She has also been working as a curator within an artist center called the ESC. And from, I think, very much a feminist perspective and an activist perspective in a range of different contexts, which perhaps also, but it wasn't all that clear to me if it also involves climate activism in some way or shape or form. So we can also hear about that. Very happy to have you here, Reni. The second person here is Renick Bell. Do you have your camera on? Where are you, Renick? Oh, there you are. Okay. So he's a live coding artist, data artist, and academic. He's originally from the United States, but he's been living in Asia for, as he just mentioned, for 20 years and is currently based in Taipei. I'm happy to know Renick for a decade now. I invited him to come to Singapore for a conference I organized in 2013 called the Sound and Interactivity. And he was performing, and around the same time, I think he was finishing his PhD work, which is really very interesting perspectives on live coding, but also of its use in pedagogy, I think. So for this event, the DACA, I invited Renick to, I pronounce him in some kind of Austrian way. It should be just Renick. I invited him to do an algo rave, and that's going to be later tonight. Next, we have Dr. Daniel KC Yeung, who is a scientific officer at the Hong Kong Observatory. He's trained in the UK, I think Surrey University, and then has been living and working in Hong Kong for a long time now. He's specialist in meteorology, but also in public relations and media relations, and the very in Hong Kong with the very significant weather reports on TV and internet channels today. So we have met from that perspective, and I'm happy to have him and the Hong Kong Observatory as partners of DACA. Last but not least, it's Moritz Stefana, who perhaps needs no detailed introduction because he was our keynote, he is our keynote presenting yesterday evening his work. He's an independent designer and artist specializing in innovative visualization techniques. And yesterday he spoke about his work, both the very public communication orientated things, but also a personal work with how does one individual seek to get more closer contact with the data itself, the material as it were. So that was a very interesting perspective from Moritz. Now, I will. I have. I have. You know, as a convener here, I will sort of try to set the tone a little bit, but then I hope that the panelists will take it into and tear it apart and take it into their other directions. But what I suggested that start this idea of exploring designs. So exploration is one sort of modality in which we can meet a design, which can be a sonification, it can be a visualization. So I wanted to start here or set this off by quoting Gregory Kramer's definition from 1994 of sonification. And he wrote that sonification is the use of non-speech audio to convey information and the transformation of data relations into perceived relations in an acoustic signal for the purposes of facilitating communication or interpretation, end quote. Now, this definition is rather engineering orientated and, as can be expected, has been subject to fruitful admiration, but also some criticism. So in particular, maybe more recent work from the past 10 years approximately has been opening up towards asking the questions, what is an aesthetic sonification or sonification that has the intention of being for an aesthetic purpose? People like Paul Vickers and Stephen Barras have discussed this in particular, and I offered a revised definition of sonification, which goes as follows: any technique that translates data into non-speech sound with a systematic, describable, and reproducible method in order to reveal or facilitate communication, interpretation, or discovery of meaning that is latent in the data, having a practical, artistic, or scientific purpose. So with that, my main question is, what might be the purpose of data translation into sound, and of course also into visuals? This goes exactly the same way for sonification and visualization, beyond the initial Kramer's facilitating interpretation. Can perceptualization of data, can it ever truly be art? Can it be experienced at the same time, both as information and as art or music simultaneously? So I will launch this as a proposal to you, and maybe you will want to take it into your fields. I wanted to ask Renick if you wanted to start with this.
Sure. I'm sorry, did you have an idea about exactly how long we need to keep our comments to, so that I don't speak too long?
I didn't think about that, Renick.
Okay, all right. Then I'm going to speak briefly because I want to hear what other people are going to say, and then I come back later and add more comments.
Okay.
Okay. So then I think the first thing I want to say, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that I could contribute to this amazing conference. So about whether the question of can it truly be art? So maybe you can remember from the presentation that I gave in Singapore those many years ago, that an important part of my my PhD research was about aesthetics and code. And I was arguing in my PhD whether we can consider code as art, and I believe that we can. And in order to argue this, I relied on the work of the philosopher John Dewey. And so the conclusion that I came to is a rather radical view of what art is. And I think that it is just a designed experience that is intended to give an audience some kind of affect. So in other words, we can design any kind of experience. And if our intention is that they should receive some kind of feeling from that, then we can call it art. And the benefit to such a radical interpretation of what art is that I think the question of whether something is art or not is less interesting. And what's more interesting is whether that art then achieves whatever purposes that we have for that art. So I would say, to answer this question, absolutely, we can view any kind of sonification or visualization as art without question. And then the more interesting question is whether
does it mean that sorry, does it mean that if it's art or not, it's in the eye of the beholder? Is it as simple as that?
Well, sure, and sure. So I suppose that will depend on it will depend on the observer, but and another point of the research that I did was, I think a lot of time those goals depend on the observer themselves, right? So whether it's successful art or not, of course, depends on the observer, whether that's the artist observing their own work or the audience members. But I think the question itself of whether or not it's art is actually a much less interesting question. It's much more interesting just to blow the field wide open and accept many things as potential art. And then it's much more interesting to ask why a particular piece is successful or not, to be judged according to the goals that the observer brings to that particular piece. So that's my radical interpretation. Yes. I guess I'd be interested if somebody has a counter definition and could justify why it would be more beneficial to limit the range. But I think particularly for today's subject, it's useful just to from the outset to say, of course we can consider all of this to be art, and it's more interesting to say what kind of effective experience do we want to get from these pieces, and how do we judge whether we are effective in achieving those goals.
Yes, but then you can say that art can be very boring, right? And if you really want to extract some information, and if you're a scientist, then you really want to be able to explore these designs and sort of get what's in there. So Daniel, when you meet something and maybe it's art and maybe you find it boring, why would you want to go on?
I won't say art is boring. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a scientist. It's very difficult for me to say what is art. I really don't know how to answer that question. But one thing I would like to add is that definition changing according to time? Well, the definition of art may be different in 200 years ago compared with that of today. Then how about the future? So I think to us, for the Hong Kong Observatory, apart from what Dr. Lee mentioned in the previous half an hour about what we have been doing in the scientific aspect, how much data we collect over that almost 140 years, we are facing a challenge in recent years, which is how to get the public to understand those data and our message as well. So we have been using many different kind of approach. Apart from using the website, we have also using some kind of, as you mentioned, visualization. Well, we have some artistic performance with some local artists in Hong Kong to do some sand painting presentation. Hope we can, through that kind of some artistic work, to get the public to learn more about the climate change and what we have been doing for so many years. But I'm not so sure. It seems that, well, in fact, we have also used animation, short videos to get the public to understand the climate change, global warming. But it seems that the public is, well, they know about climate change. They know about the global is actually warming up. But the thing is, they are not going to change their habit. They are actually staying as they used to be. So that's our challenge. We provide the data, and I don't know, is it the final step is to get the public to actually to react.
So one of the things
Yeah.
that have been tried, of course, is to place more focus on, for example, citizen science. And in Hong Kong, there is it's one of the institutes of the government, I've forgotten which one, you will help me, that actually specializes in various projects of citizen science. And I think that Hong Kong Observatory is a partner of that organization. Or is this something that you see as a way to engage people?
Well, I think we have done quite a lot of work already. I think the main thing is to well, the main goal actually is to get the people to react, to act. What should we change, or what should we do in the future to minimize the trend of global warming, to change our living style? And that's the most important thing. I know that's why I'm here. I'm happy to be in this conference, because we are trying to get those very boring scientific data into something interesting to the public through visualization and sonification. Hopefully, the public can get more feeling on what they are actually facing right now and in the future. I think that's the most important thing, and which our scientists cannot do that. And yeah, I'll be honest, I'm a very boring guy. I'm facing the data all the time, doing weather presentation, and that's it. But well, I can't get the public to react, to change their daily life.
It is a huge challenge, of course. And
of course, yeah.
I wanted to bring in an idea from Moritz that he was presenting yesterday, when sort of drawing first a half circle of how data is provided by scientists to the artists, who then communicate. But he was connecting the circle, making a full circle. And I think the idea is to bring these two functions closer together, maybe into the one and the same individual who might be a citizen scientist, tinkerer of some sort. So Moritz, would you want to develop that perspective a little bit?
Yeah, I had to think of that connection too, that often we think about the problem as merely a science communication problem, in the sense that we have all the science and everything's known, and now how do we get it to the people, right? And I think we have tried that now for a bunch of decades, to some varying success. And I think we should question a few fundamental assumptions there. And the first one is the direction of communication, that is always this first science, then art, because then art is always just an epiphenomenon of whatever science is happening, and as such already set up to be effectless, because it's sort of optional and just an afterthought. And so I'm thinking much more about, well, how does true innovation happen? And I think that comes also back to this idea: is it art? Is it design? Is it science? Is it engineering? To me, you cannot talk about too much about, or you cannot just measure that on the outcome, but more on the process. It's just different modes of operation. How do we gain knowledge? What are ways of research? What are ways of exploration? How are we guided during exploration? Like an artist is guided through different signals in an open exploration process. A scientist does open exploration too, but is guided by different considerations, right? Like our navigation devices are just different. But if you look at Ed Hawkins' warming stripes, these could have been an artwork. These could have been in a paper. Who cares? As long as they work. And he used just his method of inquiry to get to them. And he discovered them to be successful with whatever he was going for, right? And so, so I see a lot of parallels actually also between art and science. And I think often there's this artificial asymmetry between the fields and this artificial divide that's always being reinforced, which is not helpful. In short, my position on all this.
So I want to hear Reni's position on this, and maybe very much as an artist and sound artist, but although of course I understand that you work in multiple disciplines, but maybe in particular your work with this radio station, Radio Helsinki of Graz, which is of course a sonic medium. So do you engage in communication, scientific communication in some form?
Yeah. Hello. Super. I'm so happy that I really see you, that I can hear you, that we can exchange. That's wonderful. I'm again, and you see my little laptop, one of my old ones in the back. That's actually current measuring of. I have these little sensors here on the little table. So it's the classics with temperature and that kind of stuff. But then it's also magnetism and another topic, which is fine dust, which is a huge thing here in Graz, because the levels of fine dust are really high on a general level. So it's even said that the life expectancy of people who live here is shorter than in other parts of Austria. So it's really, so it's really a serious thing. And I just thought I set it up for you as my background for today. I mean, there's such a lot of nice things that already have been said in the sense of the freedom to declare everything art that we want it to be art. And I think this is very important because it makes space. It's not so much about, like, does everybody then have to like what they're hearing or appreciate the aesthetics of it, but rather to say, by declaring it art, we make up a space for exchange and debate and discussion that is different from other fields. So for me, it's a question of freeing my perception, freeing other people's perception, opening doors, creating bridges. And I think this is one of the things that art can be. It can also be in the way that the art can be very disturbing. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the sense nice or beautiful, or aesthetics also doesn't mean that it's all, we have this beautiful word in German, which is hübsch, and it already sounds like it's like everything is neat. That's not what art is about. I think the biggest difference, if we think of art and science, is that science needs to be repeatable, so that we can actually build machines on that. So engineering depends on the fact that what the data what the data comes from and what it is that we base it on, that it actually functions. So I take an example. I build my own antennas, to listen into the electromagnetic spectrum, and the ones that I love the most are based on the lines of my hand. So I'm declaring that usually when we build antennas based on physics in this understanding of this is the frequency that I want to listen to, and I expect that type of signal to receive or to send. And we need that. So we need the science, we need the engineering knowledge to actually build these. But I'm saying, okay, I'm going to build an antenna that only I can build because this is my hand. Yeah, I mean, you can build yours with your hand lines, and it's going to be different. And maybe I'm going to hear something that I did not expect to find. So it's a different type of exploring and researching. And it has a different function in the sense of it's about triggering the imagination and the fantasy. And then again, something scientific or engineering, technique-wise can develop out of that. So it has, in my perception, it has the same necessity to exist. It's part of us being humans, that we have these different types of understanding and approaching the world. But then we also have to know what is what. So if I'm building my antenna, I'm not saying this is the most scientific, interesting thing ever perceived, because the fact to think of an antenna was not my idea. So that what I do is based on knowledge that's around, but it is necessary, in order to think about in which direction technology should go, and also in which topics scientifically we want to approach. We need all our senses. So our imagination and fantasy is part of our senses. And when I think of, like translating all these knowledges, like I have that here, that I transform into sound, and I make sound installations with it, and I also play performances and concerts with it. But it's also part of, I would say, citizen science setup, which is, it's called the radio cyber transmitter. So the whole sensors and everything is mounted on a bicycle. And there's a lot of other technology also added to this bicycle. And then with that, I can go to public space somewhere here in the surrounding where I can reach. And then I will activate my machinery. So you see here, you see the visualization of the data. And that's something that I use because, let's say, as a cultural technique, we know how to interpret it. Yeah. So if people see that, they know, okay, this is kind of a, let's say, score, or and then you see, this is temperature, and you see, and you understand that if the line is higher, the temperature is higher. So it's kind of, we know how to decipher that. Yeah. With sound, it's a bit more complicated, especially, and I use a lot of abstract sound. If you don't know what that should be, it's a bit harder to grasp. It can be more interesting, artistically speaking, because it's opening our senses. But I think the citizen science aspect of that is that we can say this is a way how to experience what surrounds us. So I cannot, I can't perceive the level of magnetism that's happening around us because I don't have any physical senses for that. I cannot know how high the level of fine dust in a certain area is because we can't perceive that. But I can translate that into something visual, yeah, on my little machine. So that can be something that people get attracted to. And then I can play with it and use it playfully for a concert. And it will have, if I do these activities, there are different reasons why people approach me. Some approach me because it's a bicycle.
This is really exciting proposal, and of course it's like you are there as a let's say hypersensitive individual in the society, and you've made yourself into a human shark because you have these sensors built onto your hand that allows you to experience things that we others we cannot access, you know, and so it makes as an artist exploring your environment, this is of course hugely interesting, but it's not quite citizen science, at least not in the way I understand it, because I wonder if in your work, is there any group, is there any sharing, is there any building from the bottom up of all this information?
I mean, what I meant with the citizen science aspect of it is with these little sensors that are there. Yeah, so it's all based, everything that I use and do is based on free software and open hardware and these kinds of things. So the idea is always to make it really accessible for people to use my code and change, or it's not even me writing the code, but it's other people who do that. And so it's maybe a group of people where some of them are really experienced and knowledgeable about everything that has to do with environmental sensoring, sensors. So it can be temperature, fine dust. I have a Geiger counter that I'm using. So, you know, all these things that are just interesting to know because it's really now here in that moment in space where we are. And that's already something that's exciting because you think like, oh, really, this is the current temperature, which is not, you know, we are used to that, but still to be able to measure that is really nice. And then to see, you could actually with a Raspberry Pi, so with a little microcontroller, you can actually build your own sensory array and you just put it on your balcony and you can always know how high the level of the fine dust at the moment is in your surrounding. And there's a group of people. Maybe
this is also a solution to the challenge, and that Daniel actually was evoking that from his perspective as part of an institution that is building.
Yeah.
So if Daniel, I want to bring you in here and see if you can discuss this. I know you switch off your camera because you're taking a telephone call, but
how do you know I'm taking a telephone call? How do you know that? But
well,
we
saw you.
We saw you.
Yeah.
It's okay. No worries.
I'm sorry because I just received an urgent email and I have to can I get back to you within 2 minutes? And I'm just a bit of engaged in some other business here.
You want to leave now and come back?
I'll come back.
You can
coming
take
back in 2 minutes. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yeah.
Can you take a 2-minute response to something here? Because you worked with Scott Hessels and Shaura Chopra, and they presented a paper yesterday. So one proposition that came up, and that was quite mind-opening for me, was this idea that if you have a scientist going into an extreme environment and start taking measurements, it's all about extracting oneself. It's all about the instrument in the environment.
Mhm.
But if an artist comes to the same place with measuring instruments, it's all about, for the artistically minded individual, to relate that experience to themselves, and perhaps through that filtering, that very human-centered perspective. So two very different approaches that kind of defines again this dichotomy between science and art. But Reni seems to have a solution to the problem. We can equip all the citizens with a multitude of sensors, and they can immediately access a very wide range of information. So this Google Glass is completely on steroids, I think.
I really don't know, but I think the point is to get the public to understand global warming and how to get this, the people to take action. That's the most important thing. Maybe it's actually our ultimate goal. If everyone can take action to go against global warming, then maybe we can, as totally mentioned, the 1.5 degree threshold can be achieved in the future. So one thing is to, of course, I understand that we have to get the public to get the feeling about how bad is it right now, and if it will be even worse in the future. But at this moment, it seems that everyone is living quite happy with what they are living right now. So I've been thinking it's an example, just like a kid. He or she touch a fire and he or she get hurt. Then that kid won't do it again. To an extreme. Can we actually have some, I don't know, visual or sound effects to get the public have that kind of painful feeling, so that they won't do the same thing again in the future. Maybe they will keep on doing that for a while, but I don't know. Maybe in the future they won't do it again, or change the living style.
Yeah, but the kind of sting that Hong Kong got with cyclone Mongkut, and it was such a disaster. And I mean, that's painful, but people in Hong Kong are still using I don't know, plastic bags like
absolutely
tomorrow.
Absolutely, you're quite right. And in fact,
may I jump in here?
Yes,
Sorry.
Of course.
I just think, I mean, Daniel, I think I know where you're heading, and I totally understand it, because that's what I'm also a little bit trying to do with this sensor array when I put it on my bicycle. But I think that there's one layer where I'm not so, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I want to be kind of pragmatic or realistic also. I just see that information alone is not what is going to change people's habits and people's actions. Yeah? Because I live in a surrounding, I live in Graz. Everybody can have access to that type of information. Many people are educated in that regard. So it's not that I would say I'm surrounded by people who negate climate change. But it feels like many people don't really have, let's say, the tools to actually to get into action, or that action that we take is so small and so limited. And especially when I see that what I do as an individual really makes not much of a difference. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I totally go for every person has a responsibility, and whatever we can do as individuals, we have to do. But what really has to change is the complete system we live in. We need to have a totally different understanding of economy, of work, of life in general, of how we understand what we can be, yeah? So that the individual and the collective have some space in there. And then that really needs to get into some sort of like a change in politics, because if I see that I'm rallying, I go to demonstrations, I do all sorts of actions. Yeah? So I'm an artist, I'm an activist. I don't mind, and it's also, I have to say, I live in a country where I can do that. Yeah, so there's no political pressure on me whatsoever, and I can express all these things. But I see that all these activities, they seem to have nearly no impact in real change of politics, and this is what we need. So I think, you know, there's a kind of a, I don't want to call it frustration, let's say sadness, in that I can know all of that, yeah, and still everything that I know and everything that I do does not have this impact of change that I see that we need. I want to kind of stop any rise of temperature like now, like yesterday, yeah, but I see that I go by bicycle, I travel by train, you know, all the things that I can do as an individual, I anyhow do. And still I see that there's so much else that we need to do. And the question is how to find a way, how to translate that into action. Because I don't think that people say, oh, I don't care, shall it get hotter? And I don't mind if there's 50 degrees everywhere. I don't think that, yeah. So the question is rather, how do we empower ourselves again into becoming subjects of our own lives? It's like we are the marionettes of, yeah, and then you just fill in whatever you want to fill in.
And this, of course, echoes exactly what Moritz was saying yesterday, saying that, well, we have the awareness. It's kind of enough.
That's not the problem. I think people who want to know, it's like, check, the question is what's next. And I think this general idea of communicating climate change as a whole to everybody, it's flawed on two levels. Like climate change as a whole is intractable and ungraspable. It's this notion of the hyper-object, if you're familiar with that, it just defies our cognition. So why even start there? So we need to break it down into smaller parts. And the other is, yeah, if we think about also art being goal-directed communication, right? As Renick has pointed out, what is the goal and who are we talking to? Like, let's not try and do something for everybody, but identify really very clearly, who a certain piece is reaching with which end. And I'm thinking much more about like much more targeted things. As Reni said, it's a political problem, not an everyday people problem, and actually it's a handful of people who can actually solve the problem if we reach those in the right way. And so, yeah, I'm thinking more, yeah, on smaller slices of the problem and more targeted, like.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I find it so great and interesting. And this is why I really appreciate working with these environmental sensors. That's something that everybody can also on a very emotional level relate to. So I always find that it's if it's only abstract thinking, and I love abstract thinking, but I feel like if it's not emotionally connected to something that surrounds me and is really dear to me, it's much harder to get into this, also in this understanding and activating mode. So I really like these sensors because you can use them for all sorts of things. So you can have, you can have a sonic reaction if the temperature rises, or you can just have some lights going on if something changes in the magnetic field, which happens, which is really, I've also found amazing. And it's just, I find this to engage people into something where they're not only the receivers of information, because I'm really interested in that. I feel like I'm in an overflow of always more and more and more and more. That to get me into action also means that I need to have some stuff lying around, and then I can tinker with it. And I'm a tinkerer.
I have a theory about that, which I wanted to run by you, like, because you started also to describe why you use visuals as well, because they're established and they allow this overview, right? And then I'm thinking, like, what's the signature of the visual, or the strength of the visual medium versus what is the strength of the audio medium, right? And so my theory is, so I have a strong visual bias because I'm, visual designer foremost, or interactive and whatnot. But so my theory is that the beautiful thing about visuals and why I like them so much, if you think about a map, for instance, it's like the thing is there and you have the bird's eye view and you can explore it at your own pace, and you zoom in and zoom out, but it's stable and you have control, right? So to its most extreme.
There's also
right?
pleasure of being taken for a
direct
ride,
attention where
right?
you wanted it to be, and right? Say again.
No, I just wanted to tickle you a little bit, so saying that it's fine to the feeling of having control when you're meeting something.
It's a deception too. Like it's the
But you can also
God's
be
eye
taken
view,
for a
which
ride.
doesn't actually exist,
Yeah.
of course, right? And I think it's an important also feminist criticism of data visualization that it implies the existence of a view from nowhere, which isn't a thing actually, right? And so maybe it's the most scientific, perceptual medium, or the most heady, brainy medium, probably, right? So is vision, I would say. And maybe on the other hand side, if you work with sound, often it's time-based. So then you're sort of on rails and you don't even know what's coming next. And you're sort of, you have to hand away control, right? And it's much more also the frog's eye perspective in the sense that, whoa, what's going on? I don't know. I'm just in the middle of it, And so you are not the driver, sort of. Maybe in your work, when you point a sensor somewhere and the sound changes, it's sort of in between. It becomes more like a sensory enhancement, the cyborg sensory substitution thing is maybe in the middle, right?
I wanted to
you have some control, but also some surprise factor. But I was wondering, like, what to use the signature of the sound as compared to the visual medium. Super curious.
Moritz, I wanted to bring in Renick on that specific question there, because I challenged him to work with the data from Hong Kong Observatory for this conference and for the piece that he's giving tonight, this algorave. So he's sort of been through working with these questions of how to make sounds with sense out of the given data. And yes, it's also this perspective, just to answer you, that yes, it's great to have an overview, bird's eye or God's eye perspective on the data, as it were, through the eye. But it's also great to be taken on a ride and you're surfing along on maybe a sound wave, maybe on a piece. So it's a different mindset of how you experience the data finally. But Renick, what is your perspective here?
Yeah, I think that the fact that, as Moritz said, you're on rails, you can't avoid it. So I hope that that's one of the things that works in tonight's piece, is that I've mapped the number of hot days and hot nights to the density of events within a given bar. And according to the data, then the number of hot days and nights increases, especially pretty dramatically in the past 20 years. And then you're able to perceive that later in the piece because you're walking through it in time. And I think the fact that you don't have that control, then you're forced into perceiving that. I think if you can step back and look at some data visually, you may not get the feeling quite as strongly. And I would hope, I mean, it's a shame that most people will experience this piece streaming, because I would hope that if you were in a venue in front of a loud sound system, then you would actually also feel it much more viscerally, because if the event density then increases to a fairly high level, then you would feel it with bass in your chest or something like that. But if I can step back though, I think that Reni and Moritz's other point is actually pretty important, that it depends on the audience, like if we're trying to affect, and what Daniel said as well, if we're trying to affect some change in society, and it's true that the number of actors who can really affect such change is limited, then maybe what we really need to engineer is a kind of a Clockwork Orange type of scenario where you put the top 100 polluters, strapped to chairs and with little metal things
kidnap them?
covering their ears, and then expose them to some very carefully designed experience that traumatizes them to such an extent that they have no choice but to change their polluting and climate changing policies, right? I think this is what we really have to engineer, right?
I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we find
the planet.
Or a gentle version of that, not such this. But right. I do agree, and it's also, I think, I mean, I just think that we have to, not we have to, but we could be more courageous in actually interpreting what surrounds us, also in the sense of really challenging politicians, of course, challenging big companies, and also challenging audience, in the sense of, when I think of art as a radical tool, and this is in my understanding that is what art can be, then I also really want to challenge people in saying, like, and that's one of the reasons why I use the visualization and the sound. And I'm a sound. My background is from sound. Yeah, so I just thought like this is really helping people to understand what it is. Yeah, so it's kind of an entrance point. But then what I really want to do is, and I'm working with abstract sound to the maximum, and I want them to kind of understand and enjoy that this is part of our surrounding. So I really find it's necessary to challenge, and also me, when I'm an audience, I want to be challenged. Yeah? I find it boring if I'm constantly presented with the same type of information and knowledge also in the arts. That's boring. I want to be in a situation where I'm like maybe also be confused. Yeah, why not? Why I don't need this overall always certainty that I always know what's going on. I don't need that. I enjoy being exposed to that what is. Yeah, and this is where I really love sound, because sound is now. It's always now. The moment it's gone, like the next second it's gone. And I think that is one beautiful strength of sound, and it can be such a surprise. And as you said, Renick, it's the moment to really experience, and then knowing that this is now, and this is really, it becomes physical. This is just beautiful. And I think what the great thing about visualization is that it has this other dimension of time where we can actually always look into the past. Yeah. So I have the last, I don't know, let's say 30 minutes here, maybe 2 hours. I don't know. So I can know what has already happened, and I can maybe make prediction about what is going to happen, but it's always a prediction in the sense of it's not knowledge. It's something that I'm guessing. Yeah. And with the sound, it's always that what is now. And I find this is really beautiful. Yeah. But I didn't want to get away from the Clockwork Orange kind of thing. We need tools to find what we need to find ways how to be more effective in the change level. Not at the artistic level. I think we're great.
I'm not sure if art is traditionally very good at persuading people, honestly. Like, no, I don't think it's even made for that. So I think there's a certain mismatch there. And I think a lot of what is valued in the art world is exactly not pressing any cheap behavioral buttons. You know, I think usually if you think about great artworks, they're great because you don't know exactly why they're working, or you're not even sure if they're working. You know, that's the whole point. And so I think if you really think about, okay, how can we change people's minds? I'm not even sure if art is, or let's say traditional art practice, or, you know, it is a perfect fit. So because I think who's really good at changing people's behaviors, for instance, social media platforms, but they use a lot of like really cheap, dark patterns of communication, right? And who's really effective in persuading people is like misinformation sites, right? And meme sites and 4chan, you know, but that has nothing to do with art, you know, but it's highly effective. So just as a provocation, throwing that out there, that maybe how we are trained is, you know, if we you know, see ourselves as artists is not really congruent with affecting change necessarily.
But of course, from artists, it's just a small step to be a designer, and then you can be designers of many different ways. Maybe urban planning and architecture is also really very design orientated, and they sure do influence people.
But specifically the persuasion and changing behavior, I don't think that it's something that's built into the practice necessarily. I'm just throwing that out there, like as a provocation, maybe.
No, and I think you're right. It's not, art doesn't have a function at all. Yeah, art is totally art. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said art is useless, and I totally appreciate that, because that's what it needs to be. You know, it radically needs to be art and nothing else. Yeah, so I think that's super important. What I think where maybe one of the differences between art and design lies is that in design there is usually a concrete use case. Mm-hmm. There's at least one aspect of that where it's made for. Yeah, so art is just because it's art, that's it. And design, if we think of urban planning or whatever, is made to make, I don't know, to organize a lot of people, to organize something. Yeah, that's maybe one of the core functions of
yeah,
design.
but I must say that you know, the Oscar Wilde position there is nihilist. You know, we can't just put our hands. But and on the other side,
people, we can, no. As people, we
marketing
cannot.
people,
And also not.
that they're given the definition that design is art with intention. So. I mean, but that's also kind of presumptuous in some way.
Yeah, no, sorry. If that came across like this, then I expressed myself badly. That's not what I meant.
No, but I wanted to evoke this idea of beauty, perhaps, and the you know, information is beautiful, and art is well, at least traditionally, one major purpose of art is to reveal beauty, maybe hidden, maybe from nature, maybe in the banal and everyday, but it's all about beauty, and this should ring the Germanic bells big time. But I think it's I do think that art has this important function in not just individual people's lives, not absolutely everybody, but in most people's lives and in society as a whole, to give this to people. But then information is beautiful, right? So if we can make art that actually carries information, then we gain double. So this, I'm trying to move your mind into this my proposition about can we actually do some kind of data translation that that is a sonification or visualization, but it really guards both perspectives and offers both options of discovery and meaning extraction, and also this transcendental experience of beauty at the same time.
Yeah, I'm totally sure that it can be, you know, like I come back to my sensor setting. So each of the let's say each of the sensors sends me some information, yeah, and then I transpose or transform that information, each of that, in one specific sound. And you could say, is this like this is my instrument, and you could think of it as, for example, as a piano, where each, like I know if I like on the left side there are the deeper down tones, and on on my right hand, so I know with, let's say with the fine dust, I know it's a granular synthesis, so it's this critical type of sound. Magnetism is a drone. Now you could say, okay, this is boring because it's too linear, but if I really use that, and then I have all these, let's say 8 to 10 strings of data, it's like a little orchestra. And then what I do in my performances and also in the installations is to use these, let's say, these basic sounds as my instruments, and then I really create compositions out of that. And then I create something that I find really beautiful. I know that if you're not used to this sort of contemporary compositions and these types of sounds, it's very unfamiliar, and then it's hard to find the beauty in it, because it's something, beauty has to do with what we're used to. Yeah, so I need to have a relation to something, otherwise I cannot decipher it, I cannot understand what is there, and then I won't hear or see the beauty either. So I think it has to do with experience, being exposed to certain things, and then, you know, it's like 12-tone music. If you're used to typical Western music harmonics, and then you hear 12-tone music, you go like, oh, what's going on? And that's clear. So it just has to do with educating myself in a certain way. This is like abstract dance, yeah. So if you're not familiar and never exposed to that, you don't know what people are doing on stage. So I think it has to do with this, and then I can find beauty in this sort of expression that is, again, contemporary and from our current times, and different from, as you said, Daniel, different as it was 200 years ago, because there was a lot of that stuff was just not around.
Yeah, I totally agree that at the heart of, be it design or artistic data perceptualization, is always this idea that you take something that's like abstract and eternal and like non-bodily and make it personal, and you know, and that adds something to it, right? Otherwise it would be pointless. And so,
yeah, exactly.
I don't know, like a mathematical formula, you know, exists out there somewhere in the land of ideas, right? But if you draw a graph, you suddenly make it something on human scale that you can relate to, that seems to be like an object or something you can interact with directly. And I think that's the whole magic, that's happening. And then it can have a flavor or an aesthetics. I don't think, if you talk about beauty, it's always like the prettiness thing, but I think it's just an aesthetic experience. It can also be weird or irritating or unpleasant, right? And that could be fitting as well. But it has that extra tone to it, or that extra texture, or that extra feeling. It feels like something, right? And all that carries information, and you can design that, or you can explore that artistically.
I'd like to at this point open up a little bit to other people in this session around these topics that we are discussing here, and in particular Miguel Crotoli, who is in this session here. I would like to hear your comments. I'm sure you have some reactions to what we have been discussing here. I heard Miguel's presentation just in the previous Works in Progress, and he's working with questions of the aesthetics, the beauty perhaps of data work. So Miguel, I would like to invite you into commenting on this, if you can hear me, if you can hear us.
Yeah, yes, thank you so much to all. It's very, very interesting, all the positions and discussion within this exploring designs and the aesthetic world of sonifications and visualizations. And I do have I've been writing a lot, and I do have a question that it's popping up in my mind quite a lot right now. And I would like to hear or to know, or your opinion on the aesthetic limits, or if there's anything like the aesthetics limits toward or within explorative designs. How much as artists do we push the boundaries so we can create these very concrete or abstract realities, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds like a question for Renick. He's a man into extremes.
Right. I make it as extreme as possible, because that's what provokes a reaction from the audience often. But I guess there is a question about, so it's about mapping. So you can make it extreme, but there are so many different parameters at which it can be extreme. And then I think it just depends on the feeling that you want to evoke. I was wondering, when I was mapping that data, where I should put that, which of the various musical parameters is the best one, the most appropriate one for mapping those hot days and hot nights, because that's the one that seemed the clearest to me to represent the position that I wanted to take, that we want to take. But which of the parameters are you going to have the best effective response from? But yeah, I think if it's too well.
Do you have any position within how far you can take them towards evoking like an emotionality on the audience, or because as well as how do we allow this space for people to engage with the piece and to be open, and up to which point the engagement closes, it's closed off because it's maybe too much of an experience, if I might say that.
That was his point. No, I guess that a lot of it depends on the audience. If I design something that I think is sort of extreme, but then I take that and present it in Tokyo for an audience that's very familiar with harsh noise, they may dismiss my piece as boring and not being extreme enough, because it hasn't reached 130 decibels or something like that. But if I present that to a different audience that's more accustomed to chamber music in Graz, then that may be, as you say, that may be beyond what they're. If I surpass the 100 decibels, then that's beyond what they're willing to put up with, and then they're just alienated and leave. So I think it partly depends on the audience that you're presenting to.
I think there's two dimensions to this. So one is the aesthetic scale, as you say, is like how far can I push aesthetics in order to make it interesting or intriguing, or captivating, right? When you work with data, the other thing is how do I keep it legible? Because if you just say, oh, this is based on data from around the world weather stations, but literally you cannot reverse engineer why certain data points result in certain sounds. Like if it's an illegible piece, I think that's also makes, or it's at least debatable then if it's successful, right? And so we have that in data visualization, often this balance between people often want an intuitive design, whatever that is, but so it means it needs to conform to certain conventions, so people don't have to learn something new every time. At the same time, it should be intriguing and captivating, so there needs to be a factor of surprise and uniqueness. Otherwise, it's just bland, and I don't think there's like a fixed answer to that. It's more a judgment call in terms of, yeah, it's familiar enough so people get it, but it's interesting enough so they will remember it, or it will captivate them. And I don't think there's a fixed a rule, like, where that point is. I think that's the whole practical skill you develop after.
I would like to add something here, which has to do with the place where I'm now. So I am at Kunstlabour, which is it's like an artistic venue. It's an art venue, a non-commercial space, which means that it's not that we show art in order to sell it, so we don't need to make money out of that. That's part of the let's say luxury of living in Austria, is that there is funding for this sort of activities. And so what we are trying to do here mostly is to be in let's say in the art pieces themselves that we show, and it can be exhibitions or performances or concerts or whatever. We try to be as radical as possible, and we know that what we need to do for the audience to make an experience possible, we need to build bridges, and that means we need to find a good way how to talk about it beforehand. We want to make a good atmosphere in which people are really actually willing to explore something that's maybe a bit strange or weird or disturbing or whatever. We create situations where after, let's say, a performance, people can actually really talk with the artists, with us who run the space, so that there's a lot of different levels of engagement possible, so that the art itself can be as radical as it can be. And then when I think of it, because I do a lot of radio, that's really different, because you don't have this, let's say, it's kind of, you would need an additional layer. If we think that people listen to the radio on, let's say, a website, and you have some visual, again, information, then you can work with that. But if it's radio only, that's really hard, because I might just tune in the moment after the introduction, and I haven't heard any of the explanation, and I'll just have the sound. So we have to work with these things, and I think that's not something, Miguel, if I understand you right, also that's not something the piece in itself has to solve. The piece in itself, I always think, should be, can be as radical as it can be, as the artists dare to be, or as the technology allows to do. Yeah. So the art itself, the artists themselves we shouldn't limit ourselves in our pieces in regard to what will that do to XYZ. But then in order to communicate that what one wants to communicate with the piece, and if the communication part is the most radical, I don't know, I just want to try that out experimentation, then that's the thing, then that's the goal. That's also super okay, yeah. But I think what it needs is to be embedded in a way that it becomes decipherable, yeah. And so if it's a type of music that I'm used to, or if it's, let's say, an exhibition of photography is easy in the sense of we as audiences know what we do with it. We know what is expected of us. But if there's something totally new in media art, you don't know.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. There's something problematic about that as well. So just to, I mean, if we just think about the kind of music that is being done in sonification of data, let's say. So what people are used to listening to is pop and rock, perhaps, and there's like, I don't know, there's extremely little of rhythmic music that is preoccupied with data translations and conveying serious data such as climate data. But I wanted to point, I mean, Daniel was actually asking for some way of sort of maybe waking up people. And if I understood him correctly, he was using them when kids are playing, they will sometimes fall and get hurt, so they learned what to do and what not to do. And we're kind of missing that in the communication of climate science, of people somehow getting hurt when playing. So maybe they need more noise music or death metal that actually conveys this message. Or is that possible? Or why isn't there more death metal about climate crisis?
Good question.
Well,
Because maybe more in the text and not so much in the music.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
I was going to say that one of the reasons that the stove works well is because you're not expecting, you don't go to the stove expecting that kind of experience. But when people come to art or music, then they're expecting an aesthetic experience, right? And so I think that the unfortunately the cause of too much alienation in an aesthetic experience is they'll avoid the aesthetic experience. They won't relate that to the climate problem. They'll just relate it as, oh, I don't want to consume this kind of art anymore. It's not like, oh wow, the climate is bad and I better do something. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that it doesn't map in quite the right way.
Let's shoot the messenger.
Yeah, and I wanted to say from design point of view, I totally get it in the art context, and I think it's a super important remark that the setting and the framing is maybe sometimes a bigger part of the design of an art piece than the art piece itself, and has to be super well crafted. In data visualization design, what people learn is whenever you can get rid of an external caption or legend, but you integrate it into the piece, then things click, right? And so I was reminded of that if you need an external extra level of meta explanation, why it's a good piece, how to read it, what's interesting about it, right? It's sort of, you have to explain the joke almost. And if things happen in an integrated way, it's like the labels are where you see the patterns, things click. Again, that's a very much more goal-directed and utilitarian, thing. But I was reminded of that we try to get rid of legends and explanations and
that works.
Try to build something that works as is, out of the box, without extra help, sort of.
But to back up Reni, though, I think that works great in visual art, but that's actually much harder to do when you're dealing with sound.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's one of the big challenges. Yeah.
Layers as much as you are in a visual environment.
Yeah.
There's the Loud Numbers podcast. I think they will talk about it here as well, like in one of the sessions, Duncan Gear. And they did one thing where they actually integrated lyrics, like automated, like generated sound that would play the role of access labels, like 2008, 2009, 2010, right? So you can also think about integrating verbal elements in your sonification, of course, that could play the role of labels in database. I mean, it's not impossible, at least.
But then we have Gregory Kramer's dictum, who said that in sonification, we should stay away from speech audio, means vocal communication. And it has become, in some sense, an aesthetic that we try to use abstract, neutral sonic objects to express big ideas, but we're kind of missing the specificity of clearly indexical sounds. That was also.
Yeah, no, but I think one thing is just to do more of these pieces and just to present them. And I have an experience also with, we do a lot of workshops with different groups of people and a lot of schools and also young kids and stuff. And I make this experience that many of them, they don't like this type of abstract sound because the only context they know it from is from horror films. And I really had to laugh, yeah. And at the same time, I was also a little bit, So their emotional connection is not for me. I can listen to noise all like hours, and I love it. And for them, and I really felt like they felt uncomfortable. And I thought, they don't like these abstract sounds. It was my projection on them. And then I found out because one of them told me. She said, no, you know, the only situation I know that from is from this and that horror film. And then the others went, yes, this film. Well. So I think there's something to know about where, like how sonification is being used in, let's say, pop culture or other areas that we don't think about at all when we think like, oh, this is so nice because this type of abstract information should go with that type of abstract sound.
I want to solicit more comments from the audience for our remaining 10 minutes or so. I know that there's people like Anna Zambo, for example, who's also working in these fields. So I'm sure she would have some comments. And Rio was here, now he's gone. Questions and comments? Rio, you're back. You're working with these things. You never quite know if people are there or how much they are following every single detail of the show, but we'll give them a minute. So this is a bit of a moment for Q&A and for some directed questions from the people in our session here. So please, you can type in the chat as well, of course. We will convey it, or just switch on your microphone and speak your comment or question to our guests.
In the meantime, I have a question that I'm keen to know other people's thoughts about. So the problem of mapping is a really tricky one. How do you choose where to map that? And I spoke a little bit about how I mapped my choice in mapping, but I'm wondering if you have any insights or principles on mapping particular pieces of data to something that's perceivable by the audience.
I do, and I did speak about that in my paper yesterday. And to keep it very short, I start with a ecological perception perspective, which means that what we have grown up hearing in the context of sonification and understanding the world as producing sounds that we understand as meaningful and as dangerous or as alluring or attractive, as food or foe or mate, or and that is a matter of finding very simple metaphors, really, that can work with specific sound elements in relation to the data. So layers of simple metaphors based in ecological perception is my strategy.
I think the biggest choice is probably how you use time. Like, does time represent time, or is it like in the case of I point around a sensor, it's like user driven, like then there is no time dimension to the piece, right? It comes from the action. But if the piece is time based, like, does the passing of time in the piece represent passing of time in the data, or is it something else, which is of course more interesting, but also much harder, right? So I think that's probably the most fundamental decision, and then you have all the other things on top of that, like how do I use
example in a piece that has mapped the physical map time in an interesting way, as you just described?
In a like time is non-time.
Yeah,
I know that Thomas.
I think I've seen
Thomas
pieces
Herman
where
has done this.
It was different categories of things. Like you would have one sound cluster basically for one maybe company, and then you talk about the next company, it's another sound cluster happening, right? So it becomes more a categorization of things. But I think you could do a bunch of different things. But probably the default assumption is often time is time. But maybe it should be a question, or maybe it's good. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that David Worrell has also worked with this as a sort of there's a state-based idea. So there's a complex system which could be, for example, monitoring industrial plants, production plants. So there's all these sensors and flows and of everything that's going on, and kind of when it is functioning well, the system is more or less in a at some kind of equilibrium, and if it starts to shift, then it's displaying that in different ways. But he showed ways that you could sort of twist and turn this complex multidimensional sonic object really in order to listen in on details of it. So, so in some sense, it's all directly real time, of course, but it doesn't have the time dimension in the same way as it's not an audification as in scanning through data necessarily. It's something else. Object-based sonification, I think they call it.
I have to leave actually at 11:30 my time sharp, so in 2 minutes. So
Okay.
saying goodbye already.
Last chance.
I'm
Questions
just dropping
to
out. Oh, last chance. Yeah, exactly. So it's both, or preparing my exit. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you have to shoot the questions now, or if not, I will start to round off. Okay, I will round off then, and I've had this has been a very nice session. I'm so happy to speak with you all, to Moritz, Daniel, Renick, and also Miguel, who had questions, comments there. So this has been the DACA panel number 1 on. We started with exploring designs, but we have covered a range of different perspectives, I believe. There is the second panel, which happens tomorrow, Saturday. Please check the program for that one. Before that, after this panel, we have a break of 30 minutes, and then it's the keynote by Andrea Polli. So don't miss it. She will speak about hacking the grid and her large-scale public artworks, audiovisual public artworks. And then 1 hour later, we have, starting at 9 p.m. Hong Kong time, is the Algo Rave, in which Renick is one of the performers, together with Moon and Just B. So that is the remainder of today. Do stay with us, and then join us also for tomorrow. So thank you again to Moritz, Reni, Daniel, and Renick.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.